3 hosts for podcast kings under the sky.
7 for the trolls when they throw their stones.
9 for Tolkien fans, doomed to ask, why?
1 for the Prime Lord on his streaming throne.
In the land of Amazon where the shadows lie.
1 narrative to rule them all. 1 podcast to find them.
1 world trying to fool them and in mindless consumption bind them.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, 1 podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 273 of Popcorn Theology. I'm Miles.
And I'm David.
And I'm James.
And like Galadriel, we have inherited a quest to not rest until every trace of mindless entertainment has been vanquished. As we wrestle with The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2.
Oh, I was going to sail off into the sunset, man. Darn it. I was looking forward to retirement.
Not yet, no.
I was just going to get in my boat and enjoy mindless entertainment all the rest of my days in paradise. But instead, there's a threat to our world, to our Christian worldviews, and it is our job to raise an army to attack this threat.
And we have.
That's why we're calling upon you, patron saints. Gondor calls for aid. Light the beacons.
And that threat may or may not be Jeff Bezos. So, yes, plenty to talk about.
Kick the tires and light the fires. No, wait, that's the wrong movie.
Well, it's funny because this is, it's not, I don't think that they timed it to this end, but, we're looking at 21 years since the first Lord of the Rings movie came out, which, to an elf might just be a blink of an eye, but some of us have lived quite a life in that time.
Some of us have gotten married since then, right?
Had a kid. Yeah.
For sure. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about. And if you want to hear us talk about Lord of the Rings, goodness, there's plenty of that out there. I don't even know the numbers, but me and Richard, back in the olden days when it was just the two of us, I think, did 3 episodes, 3 very lengthy episodes.
I listened to it this week. Episode 60 was Fellowship of the Ring.
Wow.
I went back and listened to you guys.
Wow.
That was before I even was listening to your podcast. I think.
Then James and then Miles joined the podcast, and it became more like the Hobbit trilogy instead of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah, where we yeah, and that's why we're covering the first 2 episodes of this season. We're going to break one show into 3 super long movies that maybe you did or didn't ask for.
I don't think we've ever done it. Have we ever done like the premiere couple hours of a show? And not like a whole show or a whole season?
The closest that we've come is we used to do PTV episodes, so popcorn television, where we would cover like a standalone episode of a show. Like we did Blink from Doctor Who and one of the Star Trek episodes that kind of stands alone nicely, or the first episode of This Is Us. And I think that was literally all of them that I just listed there. That didn't get very far because it was hard to find good standalone episodes of shows. Then we just started saying, what if we recorded an episode on all 10 seasons of Scrubs or 9 seasons? We pretty much did the 8, but you get the idea. Yeah. We just started biting off way more than we could chew. And this is actually a bit of a correction to that, if you will. And so we're going to talk about just the first 2 episodes. So if you're finding this later, after the whole season is dropped, don't worry. There's going to be a full episode on the whole season.
Yeah,
at some point.
I think when this drops, the 3rd episode will have been out. So we're just covering episode 1 and 2. But I don't know about you guys, but part of the reason why I wanted to do this was that the first reviews that came out about this and the reactions and the build up to this, so much of it was negative that I wasn't sure if the show was going to be good enough to actually cover as a whole. And it's like,
well,
I know that
I
all
mean,
of us
even bad, we could spend a whole episode trashing it. I mean, Becky and some of our listeners would love that.
She's always keeping us positive. She's always like, in a nice way, I'm not as interested in hearing people trash things. And I think that's probably a good spirit to have.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, for the most part, if something is bad, like, we just don't cover it, There have been plenty of movies that we planned to cover that you guys never heard about because we then watched it and said, maybe not. And it's not because, there's no Christian themes in that story. It's unredeemable. There's nothing to talk about. It's that for the most part, like, we just didn't enjoy the movie. We'd probably have more negative things to say about it. And the world's full of enough negativity. We don't need to, do much contributing to that. Yeah. So, anyway, for the most part, if something's really terrible, we just don't cover it. But this one is, it's a little early to tell in a lot of cases. And so I hope that people suspend their judgment of the show till they see enough of it to draw conclusions. And for that matter, same with the episode. So if you are, gonna trash what we talk about on this episode, we appreciate you at least downloading it first so we get the download.
Yes.
Then, honestly, at that point, you can say whatever you want. And if you're going to trash us on social media, you should know those algorithms actually work in our favor. So starting arguments on posts, do it, please, by all means. It bumps our posts up in the feed.
Well, see, and I think that we would cover, if I didn't like one, but it was as... it was on the social radar as much as this one, I might push for us to do it even if we hated it, or if it was spiritually controversial in some way. I might say, like, guys, we got to, because it's so prevalent on the radar, and we haven't run into that problem yet. But I mean, even this one, from everything, I mean, this is probably the most expensive TV series ever made. That's what I'm reading. So there's a lot of sort of firsts and culture breakers sort of happening here. I think we might have had to do it even if we hated it, but I think we've already kind of tipped our hand then, as far as
perhaps a bit.
I went in extraordinarily skeptical, and we can talk about some of the controversy in a little bit, but I was expecting to not like it for the most part. I think maybe a couple weeks before I started hearing a little bit of whimpers here and there that were kind of like, oh, maybe it's not so bad, maybe it won't. I think I had an open mind, but I kind of thought, I'm guessing this is going to skew to all of the modern ways of storytelling that I'm really not liking in the last 4 or 5 years, and I was thoroughly impressed and satisfied.
I think maybe sometimes going in with a negative expectation makes movies better for me. So it's really hard. I get really high on a movie or a show sometimes, and it disappoints me even when it's good. But this, I was guarding my heart. I didn't want to be hurt by this show.
Don't hurt me, show.
Don't hurt me, show. Oh man,
I've been burned before. Oh, The Hobbit.
But
come on.
Regardless of what you think about the show looks great. It really it's not surprising that it might be one of the most expensive TV series ever made.
I felt like visually it captured the spirit of the original Jackson trilogy in a way that I'll admit, even as a Hobbit apologist, I think it caught the vibe visually and even kind of the way it flowed better than The Hobbit.
They clearly were trying to do that, and I think they were successful. I really think that it was not so much a show inspired strictly by the works of Tolkien, but so much as inspired by those stories and largely by the original films, which I'm okay with. I don't have a big problem with that.
And speaking of inspiration, one thing that's neat about watching something on Amazon Prime is the notes that go along with the show. If you're kind of nerdy and you want to pause, especially I watched a lot of this on my phone, there's often like background bonus content. And so one of the first things in I forget what they call them, like X notes or something like that.
X-ray,
it says much of the show. X-ray, yeah. Much of the show portrays things like they were trying to capture things from the prologue, from The Lord of the Rings, concerning hobbits. That's the way Tolkien put it. And then also a lot of the appendices. So things would show up in the show, and they would do a quick quote in the X-ray notes. This is where you'd find this. And I thought that was kind of nice.
Wait, Miles, so you're stopping and starting on the first viewing?
No, I went back through later.
Okay.
I stopped once or twice on the first viewing, but then I went back and
all right.
I just read straight
all right,
through.
I'll spare you the verbal evisceration. We're good. Go on.
Yeah. I do a little more of that, especially when I know we're going to do an episode on it.
He's got a young kid. That's probably going to be inevitable at a certain point. I mean, yeah. No, I'm with you there, Miles.
You kids these days and your X-rays and your...
Yeah, it's hard to get that real theater experience. But I've been trying to do that as much as I can because the scale is massive of this show. Whether you like or hate the story, you got to admit they're covering a lot of ground and they're doing it pretty quickly. I think that we're going to have a lot to talk about. But the nice thing is, like we said before, controversy, always great for downloads. Speaking of which, I know you guys announced it on the last episode, but we passed 500,000.
Yay!
And so I think that if we say something bold like we liked this show, then we just might pass 1 million downloads with all the people listening to it just to hate it. So just from saying that, I think that's going to get people coming out of the woodwork to say things. At least if social media is any indication.
The trolls coming out of their caves.
Yes, exactly. So, but before we get to the spoiler warning, again, for these 2 episodes, before we get to that, we have a bit of housekeeping, if you will. And so over the month of August, we did a patron saints drive. And so the goal there, or a march, I think is what Becky was calling it.
When the saints go marching in. When our Patreon saints go marching in. That doesn't quite flow as well.
On my end, the timing of the snaps worked out. Okay. Yes, I mean, and so basically what we said was that any patron saints would be entered into the drawing. Anyone who joined during the month of August would get entered into the drawing twice. And so I've got a sort of slightly higher tech version of all those names in a hat, and I'm going to go ahead and draw the winner. And the winner is going to get a
ring of power.
Yeah, no. So they're going to get a copy of James's book Cinemagogue. As well as a T-shirt and a sticker. And you get a say in what T-shirt you want, obviously size and, things like that. And for that matter, what sticker you want. James only has 1 book, so you have no say in that. Wait, is that true, James, or do you have other books?
Give it a year.
Ooh.
You heard it here first. At least I heard it here first.
I heard it. Exciting. Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is have the drawing. And drum roll, please.
Or like you could do Lord of the Rings drum. Boom, boom, boom.
Oh, yeah.
The winner is Nathan Larson. All right.
Nathan
Larson, who is not able to join us today on Discord, but is often on Discord, has won this pack. And so we'll be in touch. Nathan, we'll let you know what you've won. And, we'll get in touch with you about things like address and T-shirt size and whatnot. And so, for those of you listening who, weren't in this drawing but would be interested in future drawings like this, Miles, how can people go about getting involved in this way?
Oh, you can join us on our social media channels, Facebook, Discord, and of course, if you at least $8 a month to make sure that this podcast lives on, to join our army to fight the forces of narrative darkness for just $1 a month. You can become one of us.
One of us.
And contribute to the greater good.
I was trying to work in the greater good.
Oh, for sure. Exactly. And so our patron saints get things like exclusive access to the Facebook group, or access to the exclusive Facebook group, and a thread within the Discord server. And they get to watch us record, at least when they do.
For better and for worse.
Yeah.
And what's really fun is that in a little bit, we'll get to share some of the thoughts from some of our patron saints who have shared some of their thoughts, some positive, some negative, on these first 2 episodes. And I think that's really fun. I began my Popcorn Theology experience as a listener, then as a patron saint, and now as a host. And so I love pulling people into this because this will makes even bad movies good and spiritual and pleasing to me to look at things in a deeper way and with an eye toward Jesus.
We will drag you kicking and screaming.
And in
like
the end,
we always do.
And in the end, you will thank us. How many movie references? That's got to be a record, just in that short time. So
we're just getting started.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Nathan Larson, and to all our patron saints. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you for your continued support. And without it, this wouldn't be possible. So we really are genuinely appreciative. So if you aren't one, consider joining that community and being part of this.
Well, and also, even if you are part of the community, do make sure, hey, this episode could get a lot of listeners, a lot of controversy. Don't just hit the like button. Don't just listen to it. Don't just download it. Like, share it in your feeds, whether you Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Just throw it around there so the people are listening, engaging in the conversation, loving, hating. But, that's the way the gospel got spread too. There were people who loved it, people who persecuted it.
Discord?
And people. Yes. There was a lot of discord in the first century. I'm just saying.
No, absolutely. That's a fantastic point. Is that there's a lot of good conversation to be had out of something like this, and that's one of the reasons we're doing it so early. Is because it's what everyone's talking about, and so we're hoping to get into that conversation and hopefully be a balanced and well-reasoned Christian reaction to this entertainment. And so, but most likely, we're just going to get sensationalist after the break. So we'll see what happens, and join us here after the break. Spoiler warning will have been dropped.
This episode of Popcorn Theology is brought to you by Missionalware. Missionalware has a large selection of high-quality apparel, drinkware, art, and more, all from a Reformed Christian perspective. Check out missionalware.com and tell them Popcorn Theology sent you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn Theology. If you want to hear more from us, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast catcher.
Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and share this episode with your friends.
Assuming you have friends. To sponsor more content like this, consider supporting Popcorn Theology through Patreon. Then you'll make some friends.
For just $1 a month, you can have friends. You can become a patron saint and be added to our exclusive Facebook group, where you can interact, influence, and vote on future episodes of the podcast.
Well, let's get back to the episode. Back, ready to dive into the Lord of the Rings, and we have our ringers here ready to weigh in. But I wanted to, before we talk about the actual show itself, this was a phenomenon from the first announcement, and there has been so much prejudging and hate, and now it seems to be a lot of audience review bombing. I'm not even sure what to make of it. I always hesitate to weigh in on exactly what's going on. Of course, everybody who loves something says it's getting review bombed. Everybody who hates it says, no, we're just giving our honest review because that sucks. But there's a lot of hate. What do you guys make of that? David, what do you make of the hate for this thing?
I gotta be honest, there are major parts of it that I just flat do not understand why there's so much hate for it. Honestly, a big part of that seems to be people are putting it all into putting a lot of this into the context of this is Amazon, this is Jeff Bezos, this is an embodiment of him as a person. Unless he's directing and producing it, I don't think that's a fair thing to. He's involved.
I think that was him in the Sauron suit, right? I mean,
honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he has a cameo appearance like Peter Jackson used to do. But no, I think that that to me is the thing, is that people are reacting to this because it's a Jeff Bezos property, not because it's Amazon. And that to me is fascinating because Amazon's been cranking out shows for a while now, for years. Amazon has been a platform for movies and TV shows. Many of them actually pretty well received. And I don't think anybody has ever viewed any of those as, oh, Jeff Bezos is making the Jack Reacher show, it's going to be terrible or something like that. And that, I don't know. I'm curious if you guys have much experience with Amazon shows, if there's any that you have watched that you enjoyed, or maybe that let you down a bit. I'm curious where you guys are with those.
All right. I enjoyed The Man in the High Castle. I enjoyed I enjoyed The Terminal List, which actually was just recently as well. And yes. I confess I have not caught up in terms of Reachers or Ryans. So all things Jack I'm behind on. But they're in the queue because I've heard
I'll hop
good
in there and
things.
vouch for Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan is a solid show.
I watched the first season of Jack Ryan, and that was pretty good.
The first season was good, but I would argue, as Jack Ryan goes, the second season was better. It was even better than the first. And the first was good, but the second one was really good. Stand by that. I agree, James. Terminal List, High Castle. Also, the show Invincible was Amazon. That was quite good. I can't bring myself to watch The Boys. I don't think that's going to happen. Or Vox Machina. Vox Machina was all right. It was still pretty heavy, though. Pretty raunchy. Invincible was pretty good. And there's other ones too, right? Like, I mean, there's other shows on Amazon that have been pretty well received. I haven't watched any besides those, but
well, and I had mixed feelings about shows like Good Omens, which was another Neil Gaiman show. Sandman's actually out on Netflix right now, but Good Omens, that's like you got Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I thought that book was unadaptable, and so I felt it had mixed results, but probably that was just like, it's one of those things where you read the book and you're like, how could you do that? Like, I don't know how you could do it. It's like trying to adapt Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I appreciate the effort of the movie, but compared to the book, it couldn't. I think it's impossible. There's some things that are impossible to capture, but that's no slam on Amazon. That's actually, they probably did the best they could with Good Omens. And
we covered that one. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, we have an episode on Good Omens as well.
Yeah.
But like my point is, all of those shows were not viewed as the embodiment of Jeff Bezos and all of your feelings towards him and his wealth and his industry and his company. You know, for most people didn't view it that way. So why does this show suddenly get that? I don't know.
Well, the Tolkien world is something kind of sacred to people. It's kind of amazing. There are people I know who have talked about, they're like, my atheist friend is so immersed in Tolkien, and I can't get him to see that the reason why you love this show, so much of this, is because of its biblical elements, things like that. Because the world of Middle-earth and what Tolkien did touches something a little higher, but because it's veiled in the way that Tolkien wrote it, I think it's more palatable for people. Like, there's the classic disagreement between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, who are good friends. And thank you, Tolkien, for helping convert C.S. Lewis, because he was transformative in my early life. But like, when C.S. Lewis wrote narrative, he wrote, like, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, spoilers, Aslan is Jesus. It's even more.
You've ruined it for me forever.
Yeah,
it's more than allegory. It's even beyond allegory because it's actually God become a lion to redeem the world of Narnia. And Tolkien hated that kind of on-the-nose storytelling. It's one of their most heated disagreements. But the world of Tolkien is so influenced by his worldview. He was a devout Catholic that for Christians you can just kind of feel it. And for non-Christians, it's more of a transcendent experience. But because it's veiled in this way, it's great for popcorn theology. People treasure these stories. And I think that in this heated political world, a lot of people were just very nervous about Bezos taking this stuff.
Well, not just Bezos. This is where I would say the Christians and Tolkien purists got rightly upset about the marketing for this early on. Because when they first started marketing it came across very much as Game of Rings. They talked about hiring an intimacy coordinator. There was all these ideas then that obviously would have sex scenes and nudity and all this other stuff. And I think they brought some of that on themselves. Now, maybe not the creators so much as Amazon marketing, but so somewhere the company brought some of this heat upon themselves by kind of almost flaunting that they might be going astray from Tolkien's vision, which was I actually missed some of the articles that came out right before where they actually said there'd be no nudity, no sex, that it would be acceptable for 11, 12, or 13-year-olds. I actually didn't even know it was coming until they said, at the top of a show, they'll show kind of what's in the whole season, like language or violence, all those things. And I was so surprised pleasantly that nudity and sex were not listed in the heads up this show will have. I was like, what? Wait, what? They fired the intimacy coordinator? Did they listen to the fans? Was it all hype?
And the other shows that Amazon produces, like a lot of them that we mentioned, as a Christian, a lot of you should be very wary of the sheer amount of sin in those shows.
Sure.
Yeah.
Almost none of those shows that we mentioned will my son watch for a decade and a half at least.
That's fair. And even if there's not sexual content, some of them are just they're mostly just pretty. They're on the graphic side. Like Invincible was remarkably clean in terms of it's animated, but there's nothing sexual in it. But it's pretty graphic in terms of violence, like incredibly graphic in terms of violence. So that's something to be familiar or to be aware of. But some of our supporters, our patron saints, and other fans of the show were commenting in similar ways. Art Cash mentioned something similar, James, that he was impressed with what was actually missing. He said, so far, no nudity, no LGBTQ agenda. I have been able to enjoy the show with my family, which is exceedingly rare. And so I think that, again, we're only 2 episodes in, so it could be that these statements are obsolete in a few weeks or a couple months, but based on what we can see on this day, September 7th, 2022, the day of recording, I at least have been pretty impressed and pretty pleasantly surprised with that. It seems like it's certainly clean, but also just they seem to be taking care that the scary elements are kind of in keeping with what Lord of the Rings had, which honestly terrified the crap out of me as a kid, but also but that's good. That's what was intended. That's the ring wraiths were not, they were horrifying creatures. And they're kind of keeping with elements of that in this show.
I'll go out on a limb even further and just say, I went into this skeptical. We might talk a little bit about there was also the concern about sex and nudity. There's also concern from all of the woke crowd and woke agenda stuff. But ultimately, I feel like it is on the short list of the best media, I'm talking movies and television, that I've seen this entire year so far.
Wow.
If there's more of episode 1 and 2 in this show, I think I'm going to be very happy with it. I'm still scared of what's coming next. So for example, like James was talking about, a lot of the build-up for the show was talking a lot about its woke ideology. Is it now going to be sensualized? It's going to be sexualized? And I think a lot of people just came in with that. So, for example, Elon Musk had a tweet on it, and he was talking about Tolkien would be rolling over in his grave. And then it's like almost every male character so far is a coward, a jerk, or both. And only Galadriel is brave, smart, and nice.
Say, what are you talking about?
I don't understand where that could possibly have come from. If you include all the background characters and assume that they're all cowards or jerks, then maybe that skews the average. But
Elrond was not a coward, a jerk, or both.
No.
Elrond was portrayed extremely well. And in fact,
what about
Galadriel...
all the Harfoots? Yeah.
Yeah. And the dude hanging out with Galadriel has not only saves her life, because she makes a poor choice on the open sea.
She makes a real poor choice.
But then has also called out some of her character flaws. So and see, here's my problem with the whole woke thing is I hate woke stuff. Like She-Hulk right now just appalls me with its poor writing. But like nowhere in there has this character said, "Oh, elven men, you're all the same." Like there's been none of that woke sermonizing that we might see, and in fact, like 2 things I'll just call out real quick. Like, if you can change the character's gender and not have to change the dialogue, then it's not woke. Like you could make Galadriel a male character. There's no call out or no problem in this entire first 2 hours that has anything to do with gender or gender. Like they're not gender. Well, you're a woman. Nobody told her to smile more. Nobody told her that she.
Some people online are. Yeah.
Nobody told her she was being too emotional, right? It was nothing about that. That character could be male and still have the same concerns, frustrations, and even the vision. Like, change it to a male character, and are you going to be upset that they know that they're dedicated to the fact that this evil's still alive? No. This would be like going back and saying that Ripley is woke in Aliens, or that Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2 is woke, or it's like quit.
Man,
we can't revise history. Like, you can have some strong female characters. It's okay, especially when it's a character
female characters in the Bible.
Right.
Yeah, in the Bible,
in
the Lord of the Rings books, like Galadriel was, and I guess it's probably worth getting this out of the way at the outset. I've read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but I have not read Silmarillion.
The cinnamon roll? You haven't read cinnamon? I haven't read it either. That's why I call it the cinnamon roll.
Well, have you read it, Miles?
No, I've watched some videos on it. I've gone down like a wiki, hole, like following things down, but like ultimately, maybe there's some stuff where if you're a really Tolkien purist that they didn't like. Like I've seen some reviews where people were like, the people were not described the way they were in the book. The locations were not described the way they were in the Silmarillion, things like that. Maybe there's some issues, but honestly, it fits with the Peter Jackson worldview, and we're about to get into some themes that I think are the strongest connection to the Lord of the Rings, where it's got the same basic story, the same basic struggles, and like when Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings, he is such a nerd that he started by inventing a language because he's like a linguist. And then he was saying, well, languages don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within cultures, and that's how they are born. So I'm going to create this whole world to produce these languages. And then he also was simultaneously creating kind of like an Anglo mythology, like this kind of great mythology, kind of like that the Greeks might have had, but except for the Anglo world. And his Catholicism was in there, but it was, this is at least how I understand him. And so I think, at least on one level, when people talk about the woke stuff, it's like, well, we need more characters of color in this series. You go, well, if you really love Tolkien's story for that, you go like, well, of course there weren't characters of color in The Lord of the Rings originally, because it was about Anglo mythology, if you understand. It's not about purging those people. And so I was a little bit, when I saw, black hobbits and white hobbits together, I was like, okay, how does this work? A dwarf princess. But I was like, well, let's just see where this goes. Maybe so far it seems great.
Yeah.
Well, to the point also then about woke stuff. So they even dealt with some stuff. I was like, oh, where are they going to go with this? They have a moment in this show where the human character blames the elf character, and of course there's a skin color difference, so you might want to try to read some subtext in there. But it's like, you're blaming me for something 1,000 years ago. Like that, we see bigotry. Yes. We see bigotry from the humans toward the elves, but then he goes back to his elf overlord, right? And then we see bigotry from his elf superior. So here we have when you have bigotry on both sides, and there is no question that's not woke. Like woke ideology would say there's a privileged class and there's sort of only one way that racism actually occurs. To me, they're dealing with issues of bigotry. It's not woke ideology. And dealing with bigotry,
Tolkien.
We see bigotry in Lord of the Rings, right? We see dwarves and elves arguing, and then we get to see two people in the Fellowship kind of figure out. It's like this has always been a component of the mythos. It's not a big deal.
It's great. It's so good. Like when I was a kid watching Legolas and Gimli become friends, it was just like it was one of my first experiences of popcorn theology type moment. With the I never thought I would die side by side with an elf. How about side by side with a friend? For me, as I was like 12, 13-year-old, it was like boom, like a thunderbolt to my forehead, and I was like, this is about how when people understand the real enemy in the world, they stop dividing over racial prejudices and grudges, and they will actually die side by side with a friend. And the common struggle against evil, and in particular for Christians, the common struggle against sin, Satan's sin and death, and being united in a fellowship in Christ is something that overcomes a lot of those barriers. And so if you just watch with an open mind to see it, it will come through. And so, I think that this movie actually, I think it builds upon and sits within that, especially the Peter Jackson interpretation of that Tolkien universe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and to the question about, about race in this, I do wonder with people being appalled, because honestly, I've seen a lot of people very upset that they cast anyone of color, anyone who wasn't white in this. I wonder how many of them were upset by Idris Elba as a Norse.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, the Asian Norse character as well. I remember watching that and being a little confused, granted, but regardless, I mean, like how often are characters recast into a film with a different race? I mean, from a comic book adaptation or something like that. It's not that
there was
uncommon.
a small minority upset about Heimdall. I remember there was a small little quibbling minority. That's true, but they're that big.
Yeah. But that seems to have expanded so much in this context, which is, to me, it's fascinating because honestly, I think that this is, a bit of a soapbox, but I'll keep it short, that in a response to, quote, woke ideology, people I've seen some people become very willing to lump everything into that woke ideology. And honestly, some of it gets downright regressive and downright bad. Like I've heard of people describing and these are presumed believers, describing like civil rights acts that allowed for equitable voting, like actually allowing black people to vote in the country as woke garbage, woke nonsense.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, what? I'm sorry. That to me is like, when we're responding in that way, whenever we see a character of color in a story and our first reaction is, oh, that is tied to an ideology. Are we not doing exactly what Martin Luther King warned about by judging from the color of one's skin instead of the content of their character? I mean, that kind of crap makes me legitimately sick.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of something in Christian circles too, which we saw in the 80s, where like I'm a conservative Christian. I absolutely believe that Satan is at work and that his devices are influenced in culture and all sorts of things. And so on the one hand, I fully believe and endorse that. But when we had, do you guys remember Hell's Bells or any of the Christian documentaries on how all rock music was inspired by Satan? And
yes.
I feel like legitimate problems with woke ideology have created that same ultra sensitivity in Christendom to where now if anything, even like if we see a woman or we see a person of color do it, it's like, oh, it must be like, okay, great. And well, great. Then let's just go back to the era where all satanic music or all rock music is satanic and demons are lurking behind every threshold. Like woke has become the new demons in satanic lyrics. And it's like, guys, we need to calm down. And
I think
we become the boy who cried woke.
Yes.
Like one thing that's happened to me is that a lot of these the woke narrative interpreters have taught me some of their hermeneutics, and I can't get it out of my head. So now when I see a person of any identity group on screen, I think so much, how is this person being represented? And what does that mean about this entire group? And it's in a kind of an unhealthy way. Yeah. So kind of like back to Elon Musk's thing, all the women were seen as beautiful, brave, and smart and good, and all the men were seen as cowardly, this and that. You're especially aware to it whenever something is changed. Like, okay, in Tolkien's mind, probably almost all of these characters were white because it was that Anglo mythology, not for any bigoted reason, but just because of that. So whenever you add another character, now that change pops up in my head. And I just wish I could leave more of that behind. I've been, in the last few years, my narrative tools and hermeneutics for understanding have been broken a little bit because of this modern politics. It kind of breaks my heart sometimes because I don't see movies the way I did maybe 4 years ago because of all of these contemporary struggles that we have.
Yeah.
But overall in this series, kind of like one of our patron saints, like Art Cash, he was saying, I don't get all the hate for it. I went in with low expectations, but have found it entertaining, interesting, and compelling in places. Bottom line, it feels like the Tolkien we've gotten comfortable with in the Lord of the Rings movies. And I think that's where I'm at. I'm with him on this one.
Yeah.
I didn't see the agenda. I'm here for it.
No, I agree. And honestly, like we've got character, so we've got and as far as another social issue, like, oh, that looks like there's going to be interracial relationships. And I'm like, you do realize that most of the story is about the interaction between these different races, right? Elves, men, dwarves, hobbits, and that interracial relationships, like the relationship that's central in the Lord of the Rings trilogy is, in fact, between a man and an elf, right? Like it's not new to this particular aspect of it. And honestly, like Christians, we need to be very aware of our history. It was not very long ago, like very recently, that conservative Christians were arguing that it was sinful to be in an interracial relationship. And forgetting that those are all like kind of all throughout scripture as well.
Cough, cough, Moses.
Right. I mean, like we're dealing with something that we need to be careful and cautious of, because a reactionary, you plant reactionary seeds, you're going to get reactionary fruit from that. And I think we're going to, potentially be reaping a whirlwind at some point, but I hope not.
I already mentioned this a bit, but in terms of capturing the original Lord of the Rings feeling, I think that the show captures that well by showing a plurality of creatures and races all wrapped up in a big adventure to resist evil.
Yeah.
And so for me as a Christian, when I see some of these stories, I think, okay, well, where is the unity and diversity coming from? Because Christianity is one of the first major world religions that actually did have a huge unity and diversity. Literally, Ephesians, Christ has broken down the wall of hostility between the Jews, were a culture created by God, redeemed out of Egypt, created in Abraham, and they had a culture that was literally instituted by God. Sabbath, all of these things that was sacred. And when Christ comes, he says, no, you're actually going to let go of a lot of those things, a lot of the trappings of the Jewish culture, and you're going to be created into one new people. And so the Lord of the Rings in particular, the Fellowship of the Ring, all right, we use this all the way, is about having a fellowship wrapped around destroying evil that would corrupt anybody's heart of any race. And in this show, you see that across geography, across different races, they are all being drawn together in this struggle against evil. Yeah. It's like, that made me feel like I was watching Lord of the Rings again.
Yeah. No, agreed. And that's the level of scale that I think the Lord of the Rings had. And honestly, what's fascinating to me is that really the Lord of the Rings and this show start the same. They start with a sort of backstory narrated by Galadriel in both cases. Different, versions of Galadriel, but they're both saying, this is what has happened in the past, and they catch you up on it. The fact that this show is attempting to cover thousands of years of history and to tie it neatly into a bow means that they're going to have to make creative decisions. They're going to have to take creative liberties. Peter Jackson took creative liberties. Peter Jackson left out things from the books and added things into the books.
Poor Tom Bombadil. Poor Tom Bombadil.
So
I'm glad he was
those
gone.
Decisions. Yeah, me too.
Me too. We just got canceled by some Tolkien.
I know. There we go. There's the degree of nitpicking. I've seen people like the only complaint that they can raise is, well, it says the elves have pointy ears, and that wasn't even in Tolkien's. Tolkien never said the elves have pointy ears. I'm like, how nitpicky do you have to be? They were in the movies. Like, we wouldn't recognize them as different without that. Like, that's part of it. Anyway.
It's good storytelling.
Keebler taught me. Yeah.
But I like this. So if we look at the sheer, like the scale of the show, the money in CG and sets, which were actually, it was hard to tell the seams between CG and sets in a lot of these places. But you have, by the second episode, you have characters in, it's in the sea, in London, the elf area, in Linden.
I don't remember.
I don't know. Darn it, Tolkien. Khazad-dûm under the ground, in the forests, in the Southland, like all of these characters. So you have Galadriel paired up with a human, Halbrand, on that raft. I thought that sea creature scene when she's swimming away and it's smashing, man, that was cool looking. That was
really cool. They nailed that. I mean, there's a lot here that the first episode covered so much ground. I mean, in terms of introducing so many characters, kind of reintroducing some races, saying we're jumping back and there's some differences. The Harfoots are kind of like a subgroup of hobbits, and they're a little different from the other hobbits in that they're nomadic. But overall, they're halflings, right? Like, they're in the same kind of category. I love that we're getting to see some of especially the Dwarven, like, cities that are built
in their glory.
In their glory, right? Because what have we seen so far of the dwarves? We've seen, in The Hobbit, they fled their homeland that was destroyed, and then in Lord of the Rings, Gimli's going back to Khazad-dûm. The bridge of Khazad-dûm is where Gandalf fell, and so we're seeing that bridge at some point. I think I saw it at one point, and all of this in its glory before they even delve too greedily and too deep. There's some exciting stuff I think that this show has the capacity to do in setting up the War for the Rings. And that's where we're likely going to go with that. And
but the only place that's kind of lackluster, everywhere the humans live is kind of dirty. And not very enchanting.
This is true. There's a lot to be said, but I think that it's really cool that we get this kind of context. And again, I'm sure that some of our purist friends who are, Tolkien purist friends who have read Silmarillion and can elaborate more about Morgoth and about the context for this. We'd love to hear that. We'd love to know more about that. I certainly would. But we have Morgoth finally being introduced as the foe, the villain at the outset, who attacks Valinor and then goes on to attack Middle Earth. But it's fine now.
It's fine now. He's gone.
He's gone.
Like we're all good. Yeah,
he's gone. Evil's been done away with. If Lord of the Rings has taught us anything, it's that you defeat evil and it stays gone forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but that's one of the huge themes of this show that's captured the themes from Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit is that evil does not sleep. And so we get to start where Galadriel starts her life in basically it's Middle Earth heaven. Well, I guess it's not Middle Earth. It's Tolkien world heaven.
Right.
But then Morgoth, an evil foe, comes in and destroys the light of their home, that great tree. The trees are going to be important. I promise you, the trees will be even more important as the show comes on. And you have this great symbolism where you have these semi-divine beings in paradise who leave a heavenly realm to enter the human world and defeat evil. Yeah. That's the elves.
Yeah.
And you have a war that lasts centuries over Middle Earth, and it ruins Middle Earth. And you see Morgoth is defeated, but there's orcs all over the place, and so that battle keeps continuing. And Galadriel inherits this quest from her brother to defeat all the orcs and purge evil. But the orcs have spread because of there's this new character introduced. This new character named Sauron, who's a cruel and devoted servant of Morgoth.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Well, I think it's an interesting picture, too, where it's like Sauron, we think, he's Satan in The Lord of the Rings. But in the Lord of the Rings universe, he is just another servant of an even greater evil, who might even be a servant of a greater evil. I haven't read all these things, but there's just this picture that evil runs deep. It's up in the heavenly realms and down into the hearts even of hobbits eventually.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out at this point that we're going to be exploring this story as told in the show. We don't have the background in the Silmarillion unless you guys have done much more homework than I have. We're not going to be bringing that in. So anything that we say is going to be informed by the show, not so much by the mythos behind it. So again, carry that conversation out in the chat and in the group and everything like that. But what I loved about this is the imagery that we get of the fall. I mean, really, we know that how Tolkien felt about allegory. It wasn't strictly that, but at the same time, like we always talk about here on Popcorn Theology, Tolkien as an image bearer of God couldn't help but incorporate certain aspects of not just his personal faith, but his image bearing nature into the art that he created. And so I love that we see that. I mean, we even have allusions to Valinor being kind of like heaven is described in Revelation, a city with a different light source, where the light is, in this case, from the trees rather than from the sun. We see destruction of that. We see that the trees are destroyed. 2 trees, I'll point out, and that they're destroyed. They're sent away, and they go from not having a word for death. Now we have many words for death.
Man,
wow,
that's great.
I mean, like, so while elves are sort of like conditionally immortal, there's still this brokenness. There's still this fallen nature that is extended across the sea and that they're going to deal with. It's
increased.
Great.
They increased in the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil, right? Mm-hmm. They had this great deep knowledge of good, but Morgoth brought in knowledge of evil into their world. And that launches this hundreds years war. Right? And they achieve this victory at great cost. But again, this as Lord of the Rings is always saying, is that evil never sleeps. So she's begins this show on this quest where she says, more and more of my kind began to believe that Sauron was but a memory.
Yeah.
And when she's talking to Elrond, she says, evil does not sleep, Elrond. It waits, and in a moment of complacency, it blinds us.
Do you think people? I think Christians sometimes think we're in a place like that. Like we don't think about the demonic or Satan as much as we used to, and I know that there can be an unhealthy obsession with that, but things like the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, who we mentioned earlier, like that it's a great that's a great book to read just to sort of put yourself in a mindset of, okay, there's nothing in Scripture that says they aren't involved. In fact, they probably are involved. So what credence do I need to give this, and how do I need to think about that? I even think about even the movie Wonder Woman, where I think we're kind of in that place where, do you remember in the movie Wonder Woman where she thinks she kills Ares, and she looks at humanity and like, oh, they're still being bad. I think a lot of times we've become very secular in our mindset as Christians, and we don't really think about Satan or the demons anymore. We just think humans are being bad. Like we don't think about the fact that there are still all those invisible machinations kind of working out behind the veil, and that the devil and his minions are still involved.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly how, but if you watch the way people behave and some of the things that people come up with, like this is demonic. You know, in 1 Peter, Peter writes in chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, he says, to us Christians, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kind of sufferings are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. I like that verse because it tells you to be watchful, and it also reminds you that throughout the world, there's this struggle against evil.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, for sure. And that call to be sober-minded, I think, is really key, like you're saying. I mean, we're not called to be hysterical. We're not called to be paranoid. We're called to be serious. We're called to be sober-minded and to be watchful. And that's pretty similar to the call that the Galadriel seems to have in this. I mean, admittedly, she's on the obsessed side, and perhaps letting it cloud her judgment. And that's some good character development. And that's very human to do.
And you have watchful characters in the show, like apparently the chief of the halfling tribe. I don't know, the guy who's reading those books and trying to look at the signs, saying like, oh, what's going on in this world? Be watchful about what's going on. Like they're still living their lives, enjoying their food, but he's being watchful, as opposed to other people who are being like trying to declare peace maybe a little early.
Yeah,
right. You have that elf high king.
Nothing to see here. We're all good.
Yeah, everybody move along. Everything's fine.
And I don't know about you. I'm suspicious of the elf high king. They're doing a good job of putting him kind of in this gray area where I'm not sure whether his motives are pure or not about declaring peace and victory so early. I'm not sure whether. Well, I guess it's because it's Lord of the Rings. I was like, has Morgoth or Sauron already gotten back into you? Gotten into your veins? I don't know.
I'm suspicious of Celebrimbor as well, but mostly because of the casting. I don't know where I've seen that guy before, but he's got one of those. It's like when you're watching like Law and Order or something, and you see someone, and you're like, oh, he done it. Like they haven't even asked him any questions, but I know that face, and I know how these shows work. Like,
well, if you've played the Shadows of Mordor games. Which are not really in the heart of Tolkien's world, but they're very fun. Celebrimbor plays a large part in the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games, Lord of the Rings games. But I won't actually tip too much of that off because he's a fun character where he's at.
Okay.
But I like the scene. So you got the elves, so they're kind of declaring victory, and at one point Galadriel goes with them. Like who wouldn't want to go with them to this glorious place? And you see the elves taking off their armor and dropping their weapons on the boat, and there's this glorious moment. But this reminds me, in terms of us wanting to be watchful, in Ephesians 6, right? The armor of God. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that reminded me, there was a line in this show, orcs. Those orcs in that in the north, they were meddling with powers in the unseen world, they say.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's great. There's a interesting dialogue, and Josh is actually, I don't think this made it into our notes, but Josh Lindsay mentioned it in the chat. So guys, join us on Discord. This is fun. I like having the back and forth. He popped in and he included the dialogue here, and he thought that this discussion between Galadriel and her brother Finrod was really cool, and I agree. It's about the whole thing. Why does a ship float while a stone cannot? I'm curious what you guys think of this, because this struck me as kind of weird, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. The stone sees only downward. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible. The ship feels the darkness as well, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under. But the ship has a secret, for unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her, whispering of grander things than darkness ever knew. I mean, it's beautiful language. I was tempted to just view it as like, that's just some neat fluff to make it sound like, you got this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got this, kiddo. So I was tempted to be dismissive of it, to be honest, but I don't know. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that. Not to throw you under the bus, but
I think it evokes the kind of biblical theme that Tolkien would absolutely be playing off of if he were writing it himself, right? It'd be like, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to keep our eyes fixed on the light, fixed on the author and perfecter of our faith, fixed on Jesus, fixed on the light of the world. Like, if we're not fixed on the light, if we're not striving toward that, unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up. Like, we need to be fixed on the light that guides us. Like that. That is such a biblical and Christian idea, sourced in the idea that Christ is the light. This part, I think, is perfect. I think what's caused some controversy is the secret reveal brother reveals to her later, and I think people are jumping to conclusions about it that have yet to bear themselves out.
Yeah,
she's confused, right? She says, like, sometimes the stars are reflected in the water as brightly as in the sky.
Yeah.
And so then he says, what were you about to say?
He says something akin to, like, well, like, sometimes to know which way is, she's like, I don't know which way is up or down. Like, well, sometimes to know that, you have to touch the darkness. And I get why everybody would freak out and be concerned about that being some kind of morally gray, the darkness has its place too. Like people are jumping to some wild conclusions about that. Whereas I'm more than willing to say, one, do we know that brother's advice is supposed to be good? We don't even know that yet. Two, do we not see some mixed flaws, which even her sea-bound compatriot points out that maybe she is, as David, you alluded to earlier. She knows the truth, but is she not obsessed and her motives are mixed? And she's got a little John Wick revenge in her as much as stop the evil. But then also this idea of touching the darkness, within the context of a fallen world, I think we can say part of how I know God's goodness is because I've experienced the consequences of sin. I've experienced this broken world. I mean, a child touches the stove and you're like, that's hot. That burns me. I don't want that. Like, knowing which way to go sometimes is absolutely based on the fact that I have touched the darkness and no, like that is not the way to go. But in my confusion, part of the way that we're taught by actually experiencing some of that rough and evil darkness. It's like, oh no, this is why I need to flee toward the light. Like I need to flee in the opposite direction. I mean, how do I know repentance is turning from? That means I'm moving toward or touching the darkness. It's like, oh, I need to turn and go the other way. Like that is how we learn. And so I don't think brother's advice is out of character with Tolkien, depending on where 8 episodes and 5 seasons go, right?
Well, it could sound a lot like one of the things I hate hearing, in particular from young people, is, well, I just got to make my own mistakes and learn from my mistakes, and just roll my eyes and groan. Be like, you do not. That's That's why God left you the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
That's why he left you. He left you example after example after example, so that you don't have to experience that.
Right.
But if you look at Tolkien, part of his inspiration for the Lord of the Rings was as a way to process the horrors of World War One. Like that was his. So I remember seeing one Tolkien scholar. He hated the Peter Jackson movies because of how glorious the battles were. He was saying that the pages of the battles, it's only like you add them up, and it's like a dozen pages in the book.
They're very
the books
short.
are hundreds of pages long.
Yes.
Because Tolkien hated war, right? He saw it's kind of its place, and like the industry of Saruman in the Two Towers when he's destroying forests to build instruments of war. He's like, he saw the mechanization of war and how horrible that was, and he touched the darkness, and that helps really point you toward the light, to the hope. And that's a theme in the Lord of the Rings, is just holding on to hope. There's these little bits here and there where I think one time Gandalf says that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and that gives me hope. Something along those lines. I think it's a paraphrase, right? You just have these little glimmers of hope in this dark, dark world, and that's one thing that's great about the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. As opposed to the people who forget about that evil never sleeps, right? There's a halfling saying, oh, well, the humans worry about this and the elves worry about that, and we just kind of enjoy our berries,
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to get, you guys can push back, and I could always have my elders discipline me later. But but I think we have to ask, what does it mean to touch the darkness? Because in a sense, would we not say that Jesus touched the darkness? That's not to say he sinned. But he was tempted in he went to that edge of the abyss and was tempted in every way, yet without sin. He experienced the darkness of the cross. We have to ask ourselves, we have one vague line in a Rings of Power episode. Like, it's pretty hard to say that, like, as Christians and as popcorn theologians always looking, can we redeem this statement? Like, absolutely we can. They might bend it later to something that we don't like. But we would say, like, Christ went to, he descended to the dead and rose 3 days. Like, if anyone has touched the darkness and come back fully, not only into the light, but is the light, we have the perfect template for that right there.
He came back with the keys. He descended, and he came back with the freaking keys. Like, so boss. Like, and I want to agree. I guess my only clarifying point would be he touched it so we don't have to. So we certainly, taking this to be prescriptive, I think is a dangerous extent to that. That, I just got it. Like Miles was saying, you make my own mistakes, and how do I know if something's evil? It's like, well, I just got to go figure it out first. But Christ did that so that we wouldn't have to. He descended and he took on that rejection. He took on the wrath of God. Ultimately, it wasn't Satan. It was the wrath of God. It wasn't Satan's power overpowering him. It was God's wrath extended on Christ so that we could be redeemed, so that the veil of the temple could be torn. It wasn't so that we could then go and make our own stupid mistakes.
Right. But maybe, and so that could narrative willing bear itself out. Maybe Galadriel will go through this so that others won't have to. Right?
Could be.
That's exactly what could happen.
You're left at the end of episode 2 with this conversation between her and his name begins with an H. I had it written up above in our notes.
Halbrand.
He is questioning whether she hates the orcs more, or whether she loves, whether she's actually heroic.
Right.
So she's touched evil for so long, like thousands of years of battle.
Yeah.
And it's having an effect on her. That's where she's not morally perfect or pure in the show. And so there's actually this show is actually raising this question.
And we know that in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, she even admits that she is far from perfect. Like, she's like, I would become dark. Like, we already know for the Lord of the Rings trilogy that she has the potential to not only touch but embrace and become corrupted by the darkness, i.e. the ring. So again, people who are freaking out about how they're characterizing her 1,000 years earlier, I was like, well, she's both extremely wise, but so wise she knows that she's corruptible.
Well, yeah, if you recall that iconic scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, where she says, I will admit that long has my heart desired this. Frodo's standing there tempting her. And then she has her like weird little transformation, her transfiguration moment of like, this is what I would become. And Frodo's like, and that's what we're all called to see. And it's fascinating because I've seen two reactions.
That was a great little Elijah Wood. That was good. Yeah.
And I've seen two reactions to her character online, and they're polar opposites. One is like, oh, she's an angry elf. Like, this sort of, oh, she's so bitter. She's so angry. It's like, did you watch the first part of the show? Do you know why she's bitter? That giant stack of helmets? Good Lord. But then the other response is that like, I can't believe it. They didn't leave her any room for character development. She's already making all the right decisions. And again, I'm like, are we watching the same show? Because she's clearly, her mind is being clouded by revenge. And she needs to, how can you possibly say there's no way for her character to develop? If you've watched Lord of the Rings and the first two episodes of this show, there's tons of room for her to go. Like,
not to mention, let's also be fair. This is Lord of the Rings, or this is a Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings show. There are lots of characters. How much did Gandalf grow? Like not every character, not every character has to start out being an idiot and become wise. Like in any show, an ensemble is going to have a character who's kind of wise from the beginning, and then people in all sorts of substrata, right, of gradation. All these complaints seem so premature and so filled with assumptions.
Yeah, maybe when we do a final episode, we'll have more, conclusive
season
judgment
7
on her. But the central struggle that she has in this show is so biblical. Like, even if you say, she doesn't grow, but she has this choice about what is really the best thing to do. I tried to be kind of clever. For Galadriel, to live is quest, to leave is gain. A play off of Philippians 1:21. So she is torn between wanting to live in peace in Valinor, in heaven, or to stay in the amidst the darkness and hunt out evil. Going to the tops of mountains and to earn the ire of people who just want her to turn back. And she has a tough life. This reminds me of what Paul says in Philippians 1:21-25. It says, for to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means faithful labor for me. Yet which shall I choose? I cannot tell. I'm hard-pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith.
Nice. It's amazing how some of that fits.
It's amazing.
In that moment where they're all about to disappear into the glory, and it's like, now I for others' account, I need to. If it's for others and not her obsession, right? Like that's what will bear itself out in the narrative. Yeah.
And so she's, she desires to go. This is Valinor. This is the place where Frodo went. At the end of that, it's heaven-like.
Yeah.
And this is where she's also from. It's paradise. And she, even Galadriel in the show, she says, "There's not a soul in our company who yearns for home more than I." But she has this quest inherited from her brother. Until we are certain that every trace of our enemy is vanquished, I can never return. I beat my body, I run my race, I become all things for all people, so that by that I may save some. And she jumps off the boat. So she chooses the same way as Paul does in Philippians. She chooses to jump off the boat, even though she desires to depart. To live is Christ, or for Galadriel, to live is quest.
Yeah.
No, very good. And there was another element of that I think is great. Through her discussion with Elrond, she's, and I don't have the dialogue because I couldn't pull quotes from IMDb. But they say something about her, who's saying that the evil is gone. And she says, why isn't it gone from in here? He said, you speak of peace. You speak of the war being over, but why would you seek to, something like, why would you seek to keep it alive within me? I forget how she words it, but it was something like that. And I just thought that is so telling, because ultimately, as an elf, she's immortal. She's conditionally immortal as long as she doesn't get killed in battle, I think, or maybe some other weird
drowned or whatever.
Some weird conditions that she can be killed, but if that's not the case, she will live forever. I mean, she views her task as unfinished, but her choice to not go back to Valinor seems similar to me to some of the reasoning we see behind Genesis 3. After Adam and Eve take from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God has again, two trees. God has the tree of life there. And the Lord God said, so Genesis 3:22, the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever," presumably in a fallen state. And there's some sort of missing reasoning that's not exactly laid out in the passage. But verse 23 says, "Therefore the Lord God sent them out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and the flaming sword that turned every way to guard the tree of life." And so there's this element of, in order for man to be redeemed, we can't allow him to live forever in this fallen state. He needs to undergo mortality in order that Christ can save him and redeem him to that place where we'll eventually get the tree again in the garden at the end of time. And similar to Valinor, similarly to Valinor, we'll get this light source as well. I mean, there's a lot of imagery there between fall and redemption that we already can kind of see, even within, that's all episode 1 stuff. So I don't know, like, to me, that there's enough in this to, theologize about that, even though the rest of the narrative ends up having major problems with it. We can point to this and say the story and the storytellers are hearkening to what their hearts long for, which is that home that we are from and that we are called back to in Christ.
Well, and even if, we obviously know the threat of Sauron is real, but even if we didn't know that, if we could set aside our little bit of omniscience as viewers and knowing what's coming in later stuff, it's like, wait a minute, this seems very honorable to Tolkien as well, because you have somebody who has basically been in the trenches. Like, she's almost a representative of those World War I experiences, where it's like, you know what, the war's over. I mean, this is what PTSD is all about, right? This is, how come it's not over in me? We bring the war home with us, and we're not fit. And obviously we believe in sin as Christians. We don't believe that the fall is just, it's made us broken inside. Like there's volition and there's sin, but there is that other side. Like, we've been tainted and broken and hurt and damaged by the world, and that God's redemption of us and his refining of us and sanctification, it's about dealing with our sin and absolutely pulling us out from that, but it's also healing all that brokenness. And so, like, she still has some healing to do. Like,
it's so brutal. This line, she's lived for thousands and thousands of years, and she's rebuking this human. It would take longer than your lifetime even to speak the names of those they have taken from me. Talking about the evil of Morgoth and his force. Like, she has experienced some pain, and she's dealing with it a lot better than I might. Right, but it's taken its toll. And then Halbrand sees this tiny moment of weakness and kind of keys in on it. He goes, "At last, a little honesty. If you want to murder orcs and settle the score, that's your affair. But don't dress it up as heroism."
Yeah,
right. Yeah, and then it's just that idea, like, that's a good struggle, right? That's where her struggle lies. She's nearly perfect in all these different ways. Which somebody might not like. Sometimes I didn't really like the elves too much for that throughout Lord of the Rings because of that. They're like so perfect, and like I kind of related to the dwarves a little more growing up. And still do.
I kind of liked that the dwarf won the contest this time after like a whole Tolkien trilogy of the dwarf always being shown up by the elf in almost every way imaginable, from drinking to everything else. Here we had the rock challenge, and
although I think that
I think Gimli won.
Elrond gave up. I think he gave up. No, it's Durin, right?
Elrond gave up. I was going to say, in terms of a contest, remember the most iconic contest between elf and dwarf is the body count, right? Between Gimli and Legolas.
Or the drinking, depending on your view.
It was the drinking contest, but one was in the book. And if I'm not mistaken, Gimli wins the body count in the book, and I think in the movies as well. He gets him by a couple. Like
he argues he does, but then it's like, because it's by thing in his skull and he's twitching because of
there's
this.
Well, yeah, but in the book
he gets damaged. He gets like a head wound in the book, and there's this moment where they kind of put aside the competition, and Legolas is just concerned for him. I think that's how I remember it in the Two Towers. It's so good, their friendship. Like that. That does so good for your soul to watch Gimli and Legolas.
So maybe the book makes it more even. It seems like they were always making the elves look perfect and the dwarves look dumb in the movies.
Yeah.
And like every chance they could. So it was nice to actually see Durin one up Elrond. Even if Elrond kind of just called it in, like he did seem weary. And so it was nice to see that flipped a little bit.
I like Elrond in this show does a pretty good job of like the Lord of the Rings politics. I actually liked. There's a lot of comparisons between that and Game of Thrones. I only watched one season of Game of Thrones, but Elrond is doing a pretty good job of politicking in this. He's having the conversation with the king, and he's talked about the burden of leadership. And it's difficult to navigate leadership and friendship at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you have, yet again, a relationship between an elf and a dwarf that shows tensions in a show, in a different way in the show. But again, it feels a little bit like Lord of the Rings to me.
Right, yeah. And we get a little bit of that there, that, they explore a bit of more of why there's tension between Elrond and Durin. If I'm being honest, if I get to nitpick something, I think that the reason that there's tension between them is a little like, you didn't come to my wedding. Like,
but that's another way in which the dwarves, I think, are shown to be a little more capable than they were even in the Lord of the Rings movies, because it seems like at the end of the show, that's a little bit of a front, because Durin is trying to keep some distance, some cunning distance, because
that's true.
The dwarves have found something, which we might talk about a little bit later. I wasn't sure whether that was honest or not, But yeah, you're right. You bring up this thing.
If that was the reason, that strikes me as a little like silly, because we know that there's baggage between elves and dwarves that is, and I don't know the full reasons behind it. It's all in the Silmarillion and the appendices, but like there's baggage there that is deeper set than like, but you didn't come to my wedding, like.
And there's one in the Hobbit, right, that happens in between the show and Lord of the Rings, where the Khazad-dûm is being plagued by is it an army, or is it the and the elves turn their back on the dwarves at a key moment in the battle, right? And so that's why Thorin Oakenshield and his group are completely bittered toward the elves, towards
at least those elves, right? The
one that was riding on the big stag,
the elk and stuff. Yeah,
but there's consistently racial tension between humans and the elves. Like, one thing we didn't talk about is those humans there's evil burrowing under their homes. Yeah. But because they have a resentment toward the elves, and I think it's a prideful resentment because they don't like that the elves are better than them and impose their will, even if their will is better on them, they would rather have evil burrowing up from the floor than they would feel small in the shadow of the elves. And I was like, that's what pride does to your heart. It makes you make some foolish choices. Where you're like, I'd rather dwell with Satan than to deal with my darkness being shown in the light of Christ. I'm going a little bit far with this, but that's kind of what I saw in those human beings, is what pride does to your heart, where you're willing to dig in and make some really foolish choices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we see that there's even some discussion there of kind of, and this is something that James alluded to earlier, sort of a generational element of sin. And there's maybe some subtext there related to, racial tension in our actual world. But, we see that this was an area where the men were loyal to Morgoth. And that's why they're being watched so closely, to see if those loyalties still exist.
Oh,
and they probably do, because the one is storing that weapon, that orc weapon, or that was probably Sauron's weapon or something. I mean, there could be something kind of under the surface with some of this crowd. Well, no pun intended. With this,
nice.
But it's cool, like
with this crowd, yeah.
In that interaction between Durin and Elrond, there's this great key of relationships, is that Elrond, after Prince Durin is like, 20 years may be the blink of an eye to an elf, but I've lived a life in that time, And Elrond, eventually, he just kind of stops, and he just says, congratulations on your wife and children. I hope you can come to forgive me, and I would like very much to apologize to your family as well. It's kind of a cunning political move, but it's just a little bit of humility. And I like a good apology in a show. Somebody asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then you get
hopefully the place of sincerity.
Yeah, it did actually seem sincere. I like Elrond in this show so far.
I felt like it was both. A sword. And I think that's sometimes hard. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and it's like, well, yes, this is tactical. It's like, I'm not even going to lie. As a pastor, I'm trying to get to this place where we can confront this issue. Like, of course, it's tactical, but tactical doesn't mean I don't care, right? Like, it's both and. Like, yes, I am trying to move you from point A to point B, but that doesn't negate emotions or care. That actually it's part of the whole parcel. And I get the idea that like he's there trying to get Durin to join in because he would love to have them be a part of it. Like, it isn't just about securing those interests. It's also because he would very much like to see that merger from a friendship perspective, from a mutually beneficial perspective. Like it's the ultimate win-win-win. There's 5 reasons for it.
And that's a lot of life, right? It's not zero sum in your relationship. It's collaboration is often more productive, right?
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, and then we also get this like you said, he's trying to mend those fences. He's trying to build those relationships. And I really think casting wise, just as a quick side note, that the 2 continuous characters that we have so far, at least, Elrond and Galadriel, I actually think they did a really good job casting them. Like Hugo Weaving is a really distinct looking guy. You can't find someone who looks like Hugo Weaving. They don't grow on trees. Really. You know what I mean? And they found somebody who looked pretty close, pretty good.
He's not an ant, so.
It would be. I think it would be hard shells to fill Galadriel because when she's described in the book, it's like people clamor after a gift of her. I would just want a single strand of your hair to remember your beauty. Like that's like the way she's described is just stunning, literally stunning. You know.
I also think they did a good job casting Gandalf. I mean Radagast. I mean Saruman.
Oh, the stranger?
Jury's still out. Oh, come on. It's one of those
Jury's
3.
still out.
It's got to be. It's, like whoever
somebody,
this
that's for sure.
Star, like that was, what's interesting is when I was looking back on the show, what is the thing the tie that binds all these characters together? Okay, well, they're in the Tolkien world, Middle Earth. They all have some kind of connection to investigating evil, or they see this comet figure come through. Like, that's it. Besides that, it's completely different characters, different situations.
And the wizards were effectively some kind of celestial / angel kind of thing. As with my limited knowledge and not having read the Cinnamon Roll.
But there's something different. They're some kind of different
They're essentially, inhabited by spirits, if I remember correctly. So they're definitely not men. They're definitely not elves. They're not in any of the other categories. They don't achieve a rank of wizard or anything like that. So I agree it could be one of them. I also had thought, I wonder if this guy, just as long as we're speculating, I wonder if he could be Beorn, if you remember him from The Hobbit. Just because he was a different kind of thing. He was a shapeshifter. I kind of hope it's Beorn. But another option could be, I don't know, maybe it's Tom Bombadil? Like, could it be? He's supposedly older than the Hills. He could have been around. I don't know. Like you said, there's a ton of speculation on who the stranger is. But I like that they're keeping an element of mystery to it for now. And that you can't just click on the side and it says here, his name is such and such.
I will say to your point, though, David, as far as casting someone who I believe could be Hugo Weaving's Elrond and someone who I could believe could wind up being Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings movies, I map the face of who they've given us, and I could see that being turning into Surian McKellen. So I like facially, I want to say they're mapping us onto a future Gandalf, but
could be,
but it could be many other things that I could be projecting that.
You know what's fun about him being found is that so here you have hobbits who are like, you got this kind of adventurous hobbit who's a little bit different, kind of wanting to step out of the bounds of their little community, finds something of significant value and power, not a ring this time, but a celestial being.
Yeah.
And then you've got a friend that pops in that's just following the other friend to help out. So you've got this kind of Frodo and Sam thing going on with Nori and Poppy.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just enough the same, but kind of different. It's kind of the feel that The Force Awakens gave me, where it's like this familiarity but difference, and I'm kind of excited with where it's going to go. Still make me a little bit nervous. Or speaking of casting, Princess Disa, the black female dwarf, the wife of Durin. Man, I found that pairing interesting. They seem to have a healthy marriage, you know?
Yeah.
I was surprised though that she didn't have a beard.
Well, in some of I've seen some people zoom in. She's kind of got like mutton chops a little bit going on. The
okay.
sides. Just a little. If you look real close.
Remember that joke? That's the beard. That's why.
It's the beard.
That's what.
Okay.
It makes people.
And I don't know how genuine
there
that
are
is.
no dwarf women. I don't know if that was a joke.
I don't either.
But
I'm not sure. But I thought some of the promotional posters made it look like she was going to be this like really serious, like, you know, ruling figure. And when she shows up as like kind of the sweet housewife, I was a little shocked actually. I was like, oh, okay, all right, that's different. I really thought they were going somewhere else with it.
Kind of reminds me of Mrs. Weasley a little bit. Like she's
Crossover.
wise, but also kind of loving and motherly, you know. And I like that she talks about the dwarf philosophies, where the mountain is like a person; it kind of changes and tells you where to carve, which is basically the opposite of the way everybody else sees mountains. Mountains are something that's foundational and stands still. But she had this thing at the end that actually kind of broke my heart a little bit, where she says, you know, the mountain tells you where to dig and what to leave untouched.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, because of the burden of knowing where the story goes, where this culture, this group of people in Khazad-dûm goes, you know that something is going to corrupt them to where they leave behind that philosophy, delve too deep, and it will be their undoing.
Yeah.
And it's so sad to me, but
Agreed.
it's also
it's
this,
very
this neat moment.
It's exciting to see, but it's also heartbreaking.
They might dig up a Balrog of Morgoth, which until this week, I didn't know what Balrog of Morgoth meant. I had no idea who Morgoth was.
I didn't even think about it, so I saw it in your notes. So there you go.
I was like,
on that same side, you know, when Gandalf is fighting him, he says, "I'm a wielder of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor." And if I'm not mistaken, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Anor is one of the Valar, which means that he's like an angel. He's a spirit that Gandalf serves under the light of. And so, you know, there's not exactly a god in the Lord of the Rings world, but there's sort of a pantheon of spirits. And there's a creator god.
One creator god, but it's kind of like this deist, like the god steps back, and then you have kind of gods underneath that, and then maybe even another level between that and the elves. It's a complicated mess.
It's somewhere between Greek and Hindu at that point, where you've got a creator god and then other gods, and it's weird. It's definitely not a direct comparison, but also, I don't know. What's fascinating is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Lord of the Rings, by and large, one of the things that makes it stand out is that while it is a fantasy realm, there's not much talk of the gods. There's not much talk of the deities. They don't really interact with them tremendously much, except for the wizards will, and whatnot. But otherwise, everyone else just is doing their own thing. There's not a lot of worship. And if I'm not mistaken, that was an intentional choice by Tolkien to not make it into something where it was pagan in that regard. But I don't know. I'd love to have somebody with more of a Tolkien background than we have to discuss this, and perhaps that could be worth pursuing for the final episode. Shoot, you know, we've gone so long on just these two that you know, hopefully in the future we can come back to this and give it the time that it's due. We'll do a mega long 3 or 4 hour long podcast episode.
There you go.
Or release it in parts like the show is.
Well, what would be nice is we've gotten a lot of the drama around the show out of the way. I don't plan on revisiting this stuff about the woke stuff unless the show takes that turn. I'm hoping that this show just keeps on in its trajectory and I can enjoy it. Because I'm actually kind of excited. I don't know about you guys. What do you guys think is next? What are you guys hoping for? And any of those kind of closing thoughts before we finish up?
I mean, I'm as far as what I think is next. I think that I'm very curious about Theo. I think that was his name, the little boy who interacts with the sword and the sigil. What's up with that? I'm curious what's in the box. I have my suspicions. I think it's either if I can venture those. I think it's either Mithril or the Arkenstone. Probably Mithril, because that's what eventually they make their money with. Is that what you were going to say?
I thought it was Gwyneth Paltrow's head, but that might be, that
what's
might be
in
a
the
different
box?
movie.
What's in the box?
I always think it's Gwyneth Paltrow's head.
That's
It must be a nightmare for you whenever packages arrive on the porch. Then you're just like,
what's in the box
every time.
Okay, but so we've talked about the Silmarillion. I won't even describe it, but I think they might have a Silmaril in there. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sounds like you are.
But
But aren't there Cimarils in that hammer?
I don't think it's in the hammer. The hammer was used to make it.
Okay,
it's
gotcha.
It's something like these. The
Made the
jewels.
Cimarils,
Well, you
gotcha.
know what? I'm just gonna leave it there because I think the show, if I'm correct, might explain it in the future. And I don't know it that well. I've just read like a few Wikipedia articles. I'm not that deep, but
Maybe there's 7 rings in there. Who knows?
but because they talked about it, I think that's what they're building up to, which could be neat. And another thing that's kind of interesting is in all of this, these 2 episodes, it's 2 hours, and there were only 3 fight scenes. One was a flashback, I think. One was fighting a troll, and there was one kind of I thought James might like is kind of like a horror movie when they were when the 2 humans were fighting that orc.
Oh my goodness! I wanted to say it several times when you guys were talking. When those claws, the practical claw effects come up, kind of over the lip of the hole, it starts to come out. Like wonderful suit, wonderful moment, absolutely like horror movie moment. A little bit of like Evil Dead demon kind of coming up from the basement, that was a fantastic scene. And
or when he's in the water and he's waiting for it to come up, and then you see the hands. What's his face? Arendor, and then the arms reach from behind him. I'm like, oh snap! Like
yeah.
There's
I
no
thought
way
it
he
was going to
wouldn't
be
have
a
heard
rat
it, but
creature.
still.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be in Warhammer language. It's Skaven. I thought it was going to be a rat army, like something we hadn't seen before. I was kind
rodents
of
of unusual size. I don't think they exist.
Rodents of unusual. Yeah, but I like how Browyn, right? One of the themes, evil never sleeps. Right, the humans in that town don't want to believe that the evil's underneath because they got this resentment toward the elves. Until she plops the decapitated head of an orc on the table and said, "We leave it first light."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Reservations about your character, it's temporarily set aside. Yeah,
temporarily set aside.
Yeah.
I guess that was about the only bit of sensuality. I was like, that shirt's pretty low cut. That's about what I was. Like, I didn't mean to take anybody there, but I was just like, because of the drama around the show beforehand, I kept thinking, when are you gonna make the turn and turn this into Lord of Thrones?
Well, and our kid's half elf, right? I mean, like that's what we're all going. That's what we've all figured out, right?
That's what I'm thinking.
Nope,
with him.
you just blew my mind. Nope.
Well, something happened to the dad, right? He's either the elf or he's
something happened to the dad. Some kind of relationship exists that's unspoken, and the kid's ears are totally covered by hair. I'm just saying, like we haven't
some kind of unspoken thing, huh?
Ooh, okay, all right.
And
could be.
And his melanin hue kind of looked somewhere in the middle to me.
Yeah, he
so
definitely looked a bit darker.
I was.
Oh, yeah. One more thing about melanin too. If you're bothered by the darker hobbits, I think concerning hobbits, Tolkien talks about how in the past they had darker skin before they settled in the Shire. Like, there's
these
actually,
are sort of
if you're grumpy about that,
especially because these Harfoots.
feet. Yeah.
Yeah, they're migratory. So sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just interesting dispelling some of the issues that might raise your hair here and there. Anyway, I was pleasantly surprised, like some of our patron saints, even though some of them hated it. They thought, the writing's terrible. But we'll have a conversation about that too. But the themes were good.
I felt like the writing was in high speech that probably annoyed some people, but it felt appropriate to me. Like it.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the dialogue. I think that the chemistry between Arendor and Bronwyn could certainly be better. But I don't know. Time will tell how that plays out, I guess. But that's not writing. That's chemistry. That's hard to. It's lightning in a bottle. Ultimately, that's what we got with Lord of the Rings, was lightning in a bottle. Of the perfect combination of an author's vision, of a director following that vision, and of a studio giving him license to do what he needed to do to make that happen. Are we going to get that again? Well, we sure didn't with The Hobbit. And who knows if we will with Rings of Power. But I think comparing it against Lord of the Rings is an unfair comparison. It's the Proverbs 31 of film adaptations that I don't think most films prefer like being compared directly to. Because this is not exactly a fair standard. So I think that
charm is deceitful and beauty is fleeting, but a show that honors the Lord is to be praised.
There you go.
Fears the Lord. But with all that, it's not perfect, but man, it's beautiful looking, and I care most about a show's themes and how useful it is and how it speaks to my spirit. And this show, that evil never sleeps, Galadriel being torn, to live as Christ, to die as gain. People overlooking their differences, forgiveness and friendships, things like that. It's just fitting for me, and I wasn't even sure I was going to watch this show, but I'm glad that we jumped into it. I'm now here for it. I'm still skeptical, a little bit scared, but I'm hopeful for the rest of this show. Like, it's something I might be able to watch with my kid, when he's 10, something like that. Give me more. We are beneficiaries of the streaming wars right now.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the downsides, I feel like a similar thing happened with Star Wars. Like, would we ever have had The Mandalorian if we didn't have the prequels? Like, I really don't know that we would. I don't think that we would have the response and the reaction and the kind of quote, getting things right that they did with Mandalorian storytelling wise if we didn't have the sort of jumps and starts and the hiccups of the prequels. And I think that
you got to touch the darkness. Recognize the light.
I think we're kind of benefiting from that here a bit as well, which is that, like, if we didn't have The Hobbit, and some of the rough elements of The Hobbit, some of the problems with that, I don't think we would have gotten back to practical effect orcs. They look great in the set photos I've seen of the other orcs. They look fantastic. And I'm just excited about how that's going to play out. Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this. Nice. I got to start wrapping it up, but man, that shot of the Nazgul fighting the eagle, tossing it through the flame, tossing it down was so epic. It also, man, I got to get a screen grab of that. Like we were talking about before the show. This is why they couldn't fly the eagles to Mordor. That's exactly why. Watch the show. I'm tired of hearing it. They couldn't fly the eagles to Mordor. They just couldn't.
Yeah, that's true. The Eagles they're like, we're not an Uber, we're not just a service for you to call on, we're actual creatures and we're royalty, really, is what we are. So, I agree. Awesome. Well, we've had an extended edition, super length episode of this, and so we're going to go ahead and call it here. But keep the conversation going in the Facebook group and the Discord server, and wherever it is that you talk about movies. Share this episode, subscribe, please like, rate, and review, all that stuff we're asking you to do. We appreciate
or hate,
the time.
Share it and say how much you hated it. We're good with that
that's
too.
Fine. Hate share.
Pour all your hatred and cruelty
and malice into the post on Twitter and
into the post.
That's what everyone else is doing, apparently. So, all right. Well, in the meantime, everyone, keep engaging media from a godly worldview, and remember, you are not a mindless consumer.